following program is available in high definition on Channel 700. This program is designed and produced by the community with the support of TV Cogeco.
Welcome to Oakville Matters. This is a program that looks at the issues that Oakville is talking about, and talking about the urban forest and the general environmental consciousness of Oakville today. With me are Heather Govender and Karen Brock and Giuliana Casimirri. Giuliana is the executive director of Oakvillegreen. Karen's the president, and Heather is the coordinator for the Green Screens film program. And Heather, why don't you give us an idea of what you've seen in the 6 or 7 months that you've been doing Green Screens? Is it rising, falling, staying the same? What's happening in terms of public interest?
So the first several screenings I was here for were fairly steady. We had between 25 and about 47 attendees at each screening. Our most recent one, we showed Flight of the Butterflies with Oakvillegreen as a co-host actually, and we had 96 at that one. So I hope that that will be a continuing trend.
So Karen, you should take from that at the least, there's an indication there that Oakvillegreen has some influence and is somewhat well known and popular. What's your sense of that?
Well, certainly I think we hear from the people that we work with and the students that we work with that their concerns, and I think the Flight of the Butterflies, which was the movie shown, I think indicated people's concern about not just butterflies and bees and pollinators, but the environment as a whole. So that's been a focus of ours this spring.
So Giuliana, you're, as the executive director, I imagine that one of your chief objectives is to expand Oakvillegreen, awareness of Oakvillegreen, and expand the interest of the population in the environment and Oakvillegreen's issues. In your time as executive director, what's your sense of how that's going?
Well, absolutely. We've been trying to do that in a number of different ways, and have really upped our sort of outreach and communication this spring. And as Karen mentioned, the topic of monarch butterflies and pollinators was really a big focus for us, and really seemed to resonate because of the 90% decline in monarchs internationally. So a real concern there, and we had great community interest. We had a spring plant sale, and wonderful response from the community looking for native plants, and those are hard to find in local nurseries. So we provided those at a reasonable price, and had great uptake of that. And we've also done 8 and counting pollinator gardens in public spaces and community areas and schools.
Now, are you finding any resistance to the idea, or are people eager to participate in creating pollinator gardens?
Well, there is still some misunderstanding about number one concern is, am I going to get stung? Are we going to have increases in bee stings? And so we've done a lot. We have an education program, and we have a wonderful teacher who goes out into schools and gives a sort of pre-presentation about these myths that we're not going to increase the bee stings on campuses, or we don't have to worry about that really, because most of the pollinators we're targeting are solitary bees, which are not stinging, and we also have some sort of misconceptions about allergies and that kind of thing. So we're trying to do that outreach and education in the school ahead of putting in the garden, and make sure that everyone's comfortable with it, and there's going to be good acceptance with the parent community and the teachers, and good maintenance in the long term.
Well, I was a little bit surprised to hear that, because in my conversations with people around Oakville, I not only hear concern or awareness about the the loss of monarch butterfly population, but also a lot of concern about the story about how bees are dying off, and the worry that the bees make possible a lot of the food that we eat. And so it's interesting to hear that people are weighing saving the bees and fearing bee stings. Now, your pollinator garden, I understand you have pollinator kits as well. Is that right? Karen, do you want to explain, pitch your pollinator kit?
Well, sure. I mean,
Maybe
unfortunately, our sale is over this spring, but we're hoping that we're going to do it again next spring. But we actually borrowed the idea from another grassroots group because we found that people said, well, tell me how I can help and what should I plant? So we took that difficulty away. We sort of reduced that barrier so that people could buy the kit from us and know that all of the plants were native, that all of them would attract native pollinators and birds. So it was well received. I think it was very popular in that people just showed up, ordered their kit, paid for it, and picked it up and took it home and planted it. But I think by far the most popular plant was the butterfly milkweed. Which is sort of an orange mound type. So I think that's a little bit of helping citizens, but also education in knowing what they can plant in their garden. Maybe they don't have room for the tree, which is, we also sold trees, but not everybody has room in their yard for a tree. So the shrubs and the native plants were a really good boost, I think, for a lot of people's gardens.
It'd be fun to go around after they've had a chance to develop and do a photo gallery.
That's the plan. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes, and we have a demonstration garden in front of Glen Abbey in conjunction with the town of Oakville. And also one of our sponsors, Whole Foods. So we've actually built a butterfly garden in what was just a grassy space, but there'll be a sign that will be an interpretive sign to help people understand what plants are there and how they're helping, and maybe they'll do the same thing in their own yards. So thank you to the town.
Well, the grassroots strength of the environmental movement in Oakville is pretty famous around the country. And when I'm visiting other communities, I often get asked, will you come make our politicians do what you guys are doing? And I always have to say, no, I can't do that. And they immediately want to know, they're very disappointed, they want to know why I can't, and they take can't for won't. But I tell them it's something that starts from the grassroots and has to be there, and if the grassroots interest is there, leaders will come to express it and help things happen. And if you don't have that, there's no telling people that they ought to do it. And I tell them, you're a resident, you have to go talk to your neighbors in your town and grow the thing the same way Oakville grew it. I don't want to, I know you're like second generation by my count for Oakvillegreen, or third maybe. Yeah, third generation for Oakvillegreen's leadership. But you know a little bit about the history and how it started.
I do.
Why don't you, just for the viewers, explain in a few words, a few broad brushstrokes.
Sure.
How did it start and how did it get to today?
Basically, Oakvillegreen has been a not-for-profit grassroots organization in Oakville community for 15 years, so it's our birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yes, thank you. It was started because of the planned development north of Highway 5, and I guess when people realized what was going to happen to these green fields and some of the agricultural areas, they sort of said, well, just a minute here. We love this green space. We want to protect this. So that's how it got started. And certainly it was a real coup for the town. They did go to the OMB and won the right to preserve 30% of the lands north of Highway 5 to protect and create the natural heritage system, which I think not only Oakvillegreen and the town are proud of, but it's set a really good example of the important connectivity of these natural heritage systems. So
we call it, I've discovered people are a little, natural heritage system doesn't immediately say what it is, but town greenbelt kind of starts to peg it. And technically, the roots of the town greenbelt are slightly older than the roots of the provincial greenbelt, although the provincial greenbelt got enacted before we finally won the town greenbelt. But they're brother and sister. I'm not sure which one's bigger. Well, obviously the older, I mean. It's hard to know that. Obviously the provincial one is at 1.8 million acres, much bigger. And are you, as a group, weighing in on the review of the Greenbelt, seeking to strengthen it and protect its borders?
Absolutely, and of course we support that, and all of our members certainly, excuse me, do understand the importance of it. So we're not only submitting comments, we've attended the open houses. We've encouraged our members to, and we'll be submitting, and we're asking our members to say yes, preserve that green belt. It's important to us not only for recreation, but our health and for the food benefits, a lot of the farmland. So lots of reasons to preserve it and expand it, I think, is the key, and certainly that's what we're gunning for.
You had a good turnout at the province's public consultation at Oakville Town Hall. And I've heard the Premier speak in other places about how strongly Oakville supports the Greenbelt. So you're definitely having an impact. It's not over yet, though, so I hope you stay engaged.
Absolutely.
And when we get back, we'll turn our attention to Oakville's famous urban forest, our tree canopy, and our aims and our gains to get the healthiest tree cover of any town in Canada. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back. We're discussing Oakville's environmental consciousness, Oakville's history in developing its reputation as one of the greenest towns in Canada. And one of the things that's a hallmark of Oakville's activity in this entire area is our civic objective of growing our urban forest to 40% tree cover by the 200th anniversary of the town, which is in 2057. Karen, Oakvillegreen's become a strong supporter of the urban forest effort by the town. And Giuliana, you have a lot of relevant education in this area, and I think you do too, Heather. Why don't we start by shaping what the term urban forest means, because it's different than the forest that you might think of as the Black Forest or whatever.
Algonquin Park.
Or Algonquin Park.
Exactly.
Juliana, what's urban forest supposed to mean?
So I think urban forest as a term has just sort of entered our kind of lexicon since the 70s. We really hadn't talked about it before as something that was important and needed a term to define it. And at the moment, we use urban forest as a useful catch-all term to refer to all of the trees and forests in a particular urban area that we're managing for their environmental, social, economic benefits. So recognizing that trees aren't just landscape feature, they're not just pretty, but they have a significant value to a community in terms of quality of life and well-being and stormwater management and energy conservation, air quality improvements, all those things that we can actually now put a figure on, and many communities have gone through and done inventories and put that value on what all those wonderful benefits are.
When I became mayor, we did an urban forest study, and one of the things that really graphically brought it home to people was there was an aerial photograph of Oakville from high enough up that in some areas of Oakville you couldn't see the streets because the canopy covered the homes and the streets, and so it became easy to see, oh, it looks a little bit like a forest. Of course, it's not a forest, it's a urban forest. Oakville had one of the very first urban foresters in the country, and out of that work we discovered that we had about 29% tree canopy cover for the town, and the authorities that we consulted on what's the right amount all seemed to point to 40% as the minimum for urban forest canopy health and the benefits that come to the people. Heather, you know a little bit about the benefits from urban forest. Why don't you mention some of them?
Yes, so my background is plant biology, and I focus on molecular biology, but out of my own interest I have read up a lot about the benefits of forest. And being in a forested area within 2 minutes noticeably decreases your blood pressure. It increases your sense of well-being. And I find that myself. I tend to bike to work, and if I'm feeling particularly stressed, I just detour to pass through the forest, and I can feel my stress levels come down just being in that space.
That's fantastic. The Giuliana, what about the efforts of Oakvillegreen to help us reach that target of 40%?
Right, so we're, I think since 2004, have planted 17,000 native trees and shrubs in green spaces and schools and on public land, and look to do more of that. We also do a number of stewardship events. So you can plant the trees, but you also need to come back and make sure that they're cared for. So we work with quite a few community groups and corporations, and get folks out to do mulching, removing invasive species in our woodlots, and the long-term sort of checking up and care of those areas.
Well, there's an expression I heard somewhere, each one teach one or each one reach one. In this particular case, we really need everyone to persuade everyone else to plant a tree wherever they can. How are we doing, Karen? Are there any I guess there's people who might not be able to plant one but might be able to make a financial contribution. How's that working?
I think you're right in that it's a community effort. Trees are a community asset, so we all need to work together. So whether it's privately or corporations, there is a certain inequity of the distribution of the urban forest canopy, and if we can target areas where there is a lower percentage canopy cover, then certainly that's something that we can focus on. But we're reaching out to schools. About 60% of trees are on private property. So even though we've been working in conjunction with the town, planting on public property, we're now trying to focus on urging people to plant in their own yards. So as you say, there are different alternatives. There are lots of different types of trees, so you might not be able to accommodate a 4-story oak tree if you live in a townhome, but there are other trees that can be beneficial for carbon capture and also for attracting native birds and plants. So we're trying to offer that education and provide the tools for action. We have literally shovels and gloves, so we can offer those to groups and people so that they can actually do something about their concern for the urban forest.
Well, I know there's corporations who've really stepped up. Siemens has been planting more than 1,000 trees a year since they moved their national headquarters here. I think they're up to 6,000 trees in the ground. One of the reasons it's important to plant new trees is trees don't live forever, and we lose them to all kinds of causes. I hope everybody, I'm not sure if I want everybody to remember the ice storm or not. It was a very horrible experience. I don't want to ever.
We're still recovering.
Yeah, I don't want to go through it again.
Yeah.
But we lost a lot of trees in that. Yep. The emerald ash tree borer is a horrible, devastating pest, and 10% of our urban forest is ash trees, so we're going to lose a sizable portion of those ash trees. Council has adopted the most aggressive program in the country to save ash trees, but we're only able to save trees we can reach and that are of significant stature. And the triazine injection does work. You have to do it every 2 years, but it does seem to discourage the beetle, make it move somewhere else, I guess. And there are other pests on the horizon. And so with all these threats to our forest cover, it's important to keep planting, and we're trying to keep ahead of you know, nature gives and nature takes away, and we're trying to stay ahead of the takeaway part of nature, and also, it has to be said, the takeaway part of developers. Although on that front, we have really good news. We've set targets for tree canopy cover for all areas of town, and when people build or rebuild, we require them to plant enough to reach those targets. And you mentioned, you made me think of that. There are parts, when you talked about parts of town not having the same amount of cover. There's parts of town with 50%, and there's residential areas of town with 16, 17%. So there's a lot of work to be done. I have a picture I prize of downtown Oakville before the modern era, like before the 50s. There's no trees. You know, we now have kind of a tree look to our downtown main streetscape, but there was a time when Oakville didn't care because they weren't there. Mind you, the part of town that's 50% was pretty much 50% back then. Although there've been crazy things done in our history. There was around 1907, there was a 100-acre farm in what we now think of as the hospital district, and it had a lot of trees on it. The mayor of the day bought that farm and clear-cut it and laid it out as Oakville's first subdivision. And the trees that have grown there now grew there by popular will, by residents putting them in. So that was the earliest sign that the people of Oakville wanted to transform the place into a place with a proud urban forest.
I think you raise an important point is that we do have to do some planning and make sure that there is biodiversity, because some of us here remember the days of the elm and tree-lined streets with all elms, and as magnificent as it looked, there's no biodiversity. So we're learning that lesson again with ash trees, and there's a number of streets in my neighborhood where they were exclusively planted with ash trees. So in a 25-year-old neighborhood, you're just getting to the point where you have these beautiful trees and then they're dead. So biodiversity, I think, is an important part of the urban forest for sure.
Yeah, it's very interesting. On my street, there was a great deal of variety of street trees planted, but in other subdivisions I've seen, you know, like you mentioned, and 20 years ago there was a dead street tree, and I wanted to replace it, so I phoned uptown and I volunteered to, you know, put in a tree, and I got permission, and I said, so tell me what kind of tree to plant. And they said, well, the tree that'll grow fast and give you the most, you know, fastest result and nice cover is the ash tree. Why don't you plant an ash tree?
Yeah.
So,
but I think, as you say, there's so many benefits to trees, and I think we understand those even more now, and we still want to create awareness about that. But I think the challenges to trees and our urban forest and green space and that green connectivity are greater than ever. 80% of us live in urban areas now, and so we have to figure out how we're going to live in these places and keep what we know is necessary. So whether it's insects or disease or development, I think there's a pretty clear message that we have further challenges ahead of us. So even though Oakvillegreen is trying hard, and other environmental groups are, and the town of Oakville is working very hard, I think there's a message out there that we have to even, you know, double our efforts to plant the number of trees, and not only plant them but create a budget where we can maintain them, because the weather and climate are creating challenges for our trees. And as much as Oakville is proud of its red clay, I looked in my backyard yesterday and it looks like a desert. I've been trying to pile compost, but the cracks in the earth are good as threatening to swallow up my dog. So that clay, when it's hard, it's tough. So we want to make sure we're planting clay-loving trees. So that's why we're planting the native trees that we know that can thrive. But there are lots of challenges, definitely.
In the couple minutes we have left, I can't resist. Tell me a clay-loving tree so that I can plant one.
A red oak.
A red oak?
Yeah.
I just planted a red oak.
Yeah, good. And maples, red maples, sugar maples, silver maples. So there's a wide variety. People think that the list is quite short, but and it's nice to see the town planting some other trees out there. The Kentucky coffee tree, which is really cool and has these dark pods, and native locust trees. So some other, help me with some others there that.
Yeah, you know, you've covered a lot of them.
Yeah, so quite a few interesting ones. So look around your neighborhood and challenge yourself to identify some trees that maybe aren't your typical oaks and maples.
Heather, in the minute or so we have left, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would say we also need to learn from what's happening. So even things like the emerald ash borer, we need to learn from the lessons it's teaching us. So in the US, across the 15 states where it has been, they were able to measure that a decrease of, I think, about 100 million trees led to an increase by about 6,000 lung-related deaths and 15,000 heart disease-related deaths. And even though we can't always control that, that's impacted by the other ways we're losing trees as well.
Well, there you have it. That's as good a reason as I've ever heard for planting and loving your trees. Thanks for being with us today on Oakville Matters. As you can see, this really matters. We'll see you next time.